Have you ever seen someone thrown out of their home with a baby in their arms, with nowhere to go, with no one, with only faith in God as their last baggage? Then hold on tight, because what you're about to watch isn't just a story, it's a miracle told in detail. A rejected woman, with her son burning with fever, wanders alone down a dirt road in Texas, until, in the middle of the night, a stranger stops his truck, gets out, kneels in the mud, and prays for her without even knowing her name. That's right, he prays, and that prayer changes everything. The wind stops, the baby falls silent, and there, in that moment, begins a new destiny written by the hands of heaven. If you've ever doubted that God hears, this video will make you believe again. So take a deep breath, because Grace and Noah's journey will move you like few others, and perhaps remind you that miracles don't choose their time. They just need a heart willing to believe. If you love stories that touch your soul, make you cry, and make you believe again in the power of faith, love, and miracles, subscribe to our channel now. Every week there's a realistic, moving, and hopeful story like this one, and you won't want to miss any of them. Comment below which city or country you're watching from, because what happens next will be hair-raising. The rain fell thinly, persistently, as if the sky were also crying for her. Grace Miller clutched the baby to her chest, trying to shield him from the icy drizzle that soaked her loose hair and warm wool sweater. It was almost 10 o'clock at night on a cruel spring in 1987, and her steps faltered with every foot she walked on the dirt road that wound through the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas. Behind her, the farm that had been her home for 23 years was now just a shadow in the darkness, and with it, all the memories of her father, newly buried that morning, without her even having time to mourn in peace. The baby's body burned with fever. Her cries were weak, intermittent, and her despair no longer made a sound. It was all inside. You and that kid are a nuisance. Her stepmother's words still burned in her mind like a hot knife. The woman, cold as stone, didn't shed a tear for her dead husband. She spent the day gathering Grace's clothes, folding them hurriedly, and putting them in an old cardboard grocery box. Your father is gone, taking with him the last reason to support you. She didn't scream. She just pushed Grace out the door. With the baby in her arms, her eyes hard, like someone digging out the kitchen trash. No money, no direction, no one. Only the sound of an old radio inside the house, playing Patsy Cline as a soundtrack to rejection. Grace didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stop. Each step was a struggle between pain and fear. The baby's face, sweaty and red, made her hurry, even though her legs were weak, and her arms already ached from carrying him. Makeshift bags hung from her shoulders. In one, old clothes. In the other, a bottle, a blanket, and the only picture she had of her mother dead for almost a decade. The full moon dimly illuminated the path, and the sounds of the night crickets, wind, the occasional distant howl seemed to mock the loneliness that swallowed her like an abyss. She stopped beneath a crooked tree, its branches dripping as if they too were exhausted. She knelt on the muddy ground, breathing heavily. The baby whimpered in her arms, and she whispered, "Hang on just a little longer, son. Mommy will find a place. We'll be okay. I promise." But even she didn't believe it anymore. Her last remaining hope was a fragile faith, inherited from her father, who used to say, "God never abandons those in the valley, daughter. He appears when all seems lost." At that moment, she saw only mud, fear, and a night that seemed endless. It was then that something flashed in the distance. Two headlights appeared at the end of the road, dancing in the thin fog. An old car, maybe a pickup truck. Grace jumped to her feet, her baby in her arms, her eyes wide with hope and panic. Is this someone who can help? or just another danger we need to flee from? Her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum. She took a step back, then two. She stood still, her body trembling. The roar of the engine grew louder, closer, until the dark 1972 Chevy stopped a few feet away. The headlights illuminated. Her wet face, the baby in her arms, and the scene froze in time. The driver's door creaked open. A tall man got out, wearing a plaid shirt, mud-covered boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that hid part of his face. He said nothing, just watched. Grace didn't know whether to scream or run. But then he slowly took off his hat, placed it against his chest, and knelt in the mud. "Lord," he said, his voice deep and firm, "if this woman needs me, guide me. Show me what to do." It was as if time stood still. The wind died. Even the baby went quiet. Something in the air shifted. And Grace Grace felt it. It wasn't just a stranger. It was an answer. The man stood, looked her in the eye, and said, "My name is Caleb Walker. I have a ranch 3 miles away. It's cold, it's dangerous, and you need a place now. I'm no angel, but I am a man of faith. And if God put you in front of me, then it's for a reason." Grace hesitated. The baby was breathing better, but still burning with fever. Her feet ached. Instinct screamed at her to trust no one, but an inexplicable peace filled the air. She just nodded, unable to speak. Caleb held out his hand. "Let's go, one night, then you decide." And that was how it all began. The truck was moving slowly, its tires digging deep into the red mud of the narrow road when Caleb saw the silhouette ahead. At first, he thought it was an animal or a fallen log, but as the headlights revealed the image behind the rain, his chest tightened. It was a woman soaked, gasping, holding a baby to her chest as if its life depended on her own body. Instinct prevailed over any doubt. He pulled over to the shoulder, turned off the engine, and jumped out without a second. Thought, the rain pounding down on his hat. Grace didn't know whether to flee or fall to her knees. The man approached with calm but steady steps. She looked him up and down. Tall, with the posture of someone carrying the weight of the world. Ancient boots, jeans wet to the knees, and a voice that seemed to come from a safe place, not from the words spoken, but from the ones yet to be spoken. "I don't want to scare you," he said, his hands visibly away from his body. "I'm Caleb Walker. There's a ranch a few minutes away, and a roaring fire. Please, let me help." But it was what he did next that disarmed any resistance. Caleb knelt right there in the mud, took off his hat, and placed it against his chest. Kneeling, with his eyes closed, he prayed, not knowing her name, not knowing if she would trust him, not knowing if she was running from something. "Lord, if it is your will that this woman cross my path, give me wisdom to care for her without invading, without hurting. May my home be a refuge, not a prison, and may this child sleep in peace tonight." The prayer was unrehearsed. It was a whisper of the soul. Grace felt her entire body tremble. She wasn't used to true faith. Her father was a believer, yes, but discreetly. She'd never seen a man that size kneel in the mud for someone he didn't even know. The baby in her arms, previously feverish and restless, stopped crying. The silence that followed was dense, but not uncomfortable. It was as if time had been suspended just for that moment. She didn't respond with words. She just nodded with a look. And at that moment, Caleb stood and offered his hand. "Let's get you guys in the car. It's too cold to stay here." Inside the truck, the seat was old leather and smelled of burnt wood. The radio blared a gospel station softly, almost as a backdrop to Grace's confused thoughts. Caleb drove slowly, carefully, casting discreet glances in the rearview mirror. "You don't have to tell me anything right now," he said softly. "But if you need food, hot water, and a roof over your head, I can provide that." The simplicity of the proposal shattered her more than 1,000 promises. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to take a deep breath, even though she still clutched the baby with the tightness of someone afraid of losing him. The road to the ranch seemed longer than it actually was. Grace noticed every detail: the whir of the windshield wipers, the dripping sound from the truck's roof, the way Caleb kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel, even when she could barely hold on to her own certainties. The child was finally asleep. His face, once flushed, was now relieved. It was as if the stranger's presence had shifted something invisible in the air. "His name is Noah," Grace said suddenly, breaking the silence. Caleb glanced in the mirror. "Beautiful name. It carries the weight of promise." Arriving at the ranch, Caleb jumped out and opened the passenger door with a makeshift umbrella. He helped Grace out carefully, not touching anything she shouldn't. The house was plain on the outside, but heat emanated from the windows. A fireplace was blazing. The lights were dim. An old radio played vinyl. The smell of soup hung in the eye. Air. Grace paused on the porch, hesitant. He noticed. "I understand your fear, but this door here," he pointed inside, "will never lock behind you. Come in if you want, or I can get blankets and you can stay in the truck." It was as if he knew exactly where to touch without hurting. Grace entered, with small steps, still wary, but driven by something stronger than logic. Inside, a kettle whistled on the stove. The house was tidy, with old portraits and an open Bible on the end table. Caleb brought a clean towel and a pair of thick socks and spread them out on the sofa. "There's a small guest room off the kitchen. It's warm. The crib is dismantled, but it has a mattress and blanket." Grace sat on the edge of the sofa, pressing Noah against her. Caleb didn't ask any more questions. He simply said, "This house belongs to God. I just take care of it." That night, as the wall clock struck 11:25, Grace sat before the makeshift crib, watching her son sleep without fever. She still didn't know who the man was, nor why God had placed their paths at odds. But she knew that what she had felt there when Caleb knelt in the mud and prayed without knowing her wasn't human. It was heavenly. And a part of her, tired of fighting, was beginning to surrender, not to the man, but to peace. The wood of the porch creaked beneath Caleb's boots as he led Grace to the side entrance of the house. The screen door creaked open, revealing the interior warmed by a rustic stone fireplace. A soft yellow light spilled from the lampshade on. An antique piece of furniture and the smell of freshly cooked soup mingled with the aroma of lavender and wood. It was a home, simple, unpretentious, but imbued with something Grace hadn't felt in a long time: presence. And it wasn't just a man's. It was as if God lived there. Caleb put the pot of water to boil on the wood stove, grabbed an enameled metal basin, and carefully filled it. He wet a clean towel and knelt beside the couch where Grace had laid Noah. With gentle, silent gestures, he began to clean the boy's feverish face, alternating compresses with quiet prayers. "Lord, you know this little one better than any of us. May relief come soon, and may this child feel your love even in the midst of pain." His voice trembled, but his faith was firm. Grace watched without saying a word. She wasn't used to this kind of care, much less from a man. Her experience with male figures was marked by shouts, omissions, and slammed doors. But there, kneeling, wet from the rain, with steady hands and an open heart, Caleb seemed like a different kind of human being. She looked around. On the bookshelf hung a framed photo of a smiling woman beside him. Blonde, hair in a braid, holding a baby she didn't recognize. Beside it, a Bible marked with colorful ribbons, and a rosary hanging from a nail. That was my wife. Abigail, he said without looking, noticing her eyes fixed on the image. She left 3 years ago. Cancer. The silence that followed was respectful thick. Grace bowed her head and whispered, "I'm sorry." Caleb just nodded. "Me too, every day. But I know she's with God, and I know she wouldn't let me walk past someone with a baby in her arms and turn away." That sentence fell over Grace like a warm blanket. It was unexpected, disarming, and true. Her eyes scanned the room. There were woven rugs on the floor, flowered curtains, a china cabinet with simple china dishes, and an old radio playing instrumental Christian music. On the walls, hand-embroidered prints with Bible verses. "The Lord is my shepherd, ... In peace I will lie down and sleep. All things work together for good." They were silent reminders that this place was supported by something greater than tiles and beams. Even so, Grace felt the old armor rising, the fear of dependence, of the illusion of shelter. She remained alert, but her body began to give out. Exhaustion weighed heavily. Still, she fought the thought of relaxing there. She didn't know this man. What if it was all just appearance? But then Noah sighed in relief. The fever had broken. His chest rose and fell calmly, and in that moment, she understood. Maybe it wasn't Caleb. Maybe it was God making his home for a few nights in the heart of a widower. Caleb returned with a dry blanket and spread it over her. "You can use the guest room. It's not very luxurious, but it has a firm mattress and clean blankets." Grace looked at him for a moment, searching his eyes. He just smiled simply and pointed down the hallway. "Second door on the right. If you need anything, I'll be in the radio room. I have a habit of listening to late-night broadcasts. It helps me sleep." She stood still for a few seconds, then got up and followed. The room was small, with light wood. Walls and a window with hand-embroidered curtains. A woven rug warmed the floor, and a rocking chair rested beside the single bed. An empty picture frame sat on the nightstand, as if waiting for a new memory. Grace gently placed Noah on the bed, lay down beside him, and pulled the covers up to her chin. The silence was deep, welcoming. Across the house, Caleb turned the radio knob, searching for voices. When he finally found a station playing old sermons, he crossed his arms over his chest and looked out the porch window. Outside, the sky was already showing signs of truce. He murmured, "If the Lord brought her, then give me wisdom to do what is right." The radio continued to play softly, and in the darkness of the room, Grace finally closed her eyes, feeling something she had long forgotten: safety. Dawn crept silently through the crevices of the ranch. Outside, the wind had died down, and the rain now fell like a soft whisper, almost a lullaby. Inside the guest room, the only sound was Grace and Noah's breathing, punctuated by the faint creak of the ancient wood. The kitchen clock read 3:27 when a faint moan began to emerge from the mattress. First a sob, then a tremor. Grace woke with a start when she felt her son's body tremble uncontrollably in her arms. "Noah?" Her voice was shaky, almost cracking. The baby was convulsing. His eyes were rolling, and his body seemed to burn like iron in a fire. Panic took over. Grace screamed, the sound ripping through the stillness of the night like human thunder. "Caleb!" She gathered the boy into her arms, crying, trying to hold back the spasms with her hands, unsure of what to do, what to hold, how to stop this. No, oh my God, no, not him. That was when the door burst open, and Caleb burst in, barefoot, his heart in his eyes. He didn't ask. He simply ran to her, knelt, and gently picked up Noah, as if holding something sacred. The baby trembled, his eyes unfocused, his breathing shallow. "Lay him down here. Now." Caleb spread a blanket on the rug and laid the little one on it. Grace knelt beside him, her eyes filled with despair. "He's going to die. Caleb, he's going to die." But the rancher already had his hands outstretched over the child, his voice firm, low, and filled with heavenly authority. "In the name of Jesus, I cry out now for this boy's body. Every fever, every infection, every illness, leave, now. By the power of the blood of the Lamb, which heals, which restores, which frees. Lord, I know you can. I know you are here, not by our merits, but by your mercy. This baby belongs to you." Grace trembled on her knees, crying uncontrollably. The storm outside suddenly stopped, as if someone had turned off the sky with a switch. The wind stopped. The rain disappeared. The silence was absolute. Noah stopped shaking. His small body slowly stilled, his eyes closed, and a long sigh escaped his lips. Caleb picked him up again and rested his forehead against the child's, as if they shared the same faith. "It's passing. He's fine," he said. But Grace couldn't speak. She just stared, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes spilling everything she'd held back since being expelled. Her chest heaved as if struggling to grasp the impossible. She approached, knelt before Caleb, and looked at her son. His skin was cool, but not from fever, from peace. He slept as if in God's lap. How? She tried to ask, but her throat wouldn't let her. Caleb looked at her with teary but steady eyes. "It was God," she said with the certainty of someone who had seen death up close and had also seen heaven touch earth. "What you saw wasn't me. It was him." Grace touched Caleb's arm, her fingers trembling. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of his touch. It was as if that scene had ripped away all her armor, all her trauma, all her distrust. She rested her head on his shoulder, saying nothing. She just cried. She cried for her father, for her rejection, for her loneliness. She cried because someone had finally knelt for her, because a man had held her son and given him to God instead of rejecting him. The clock struck 4:10 when she rose, still silent, and carried Noah back to his mattress. The baby slept soundly, no sign of the fever remaining. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching silently, his eyes wet. Before leaving, he said in a choked voice, "Grace, no matter what you've been through, God is still with you." And tonight was proof of that. She nodded, unable to answer. But deep in her chest, something had changed. Later, as she lay in bed, she kept her eyes fixed on the wooden ceiling. She replayed every second of that miracle. Caleb's words, his heartfelt plea, the way the sky responded. She couldn't explain, and she didn't want to. For the first time in years, she felt someone or something was fighting for her. For the first time, she felt ... chosen, and not just tolerated. The sun shone brightly again the next morning, as if the sky wanted to make up for the night of agony and miracle. Mud puddles still marked the ranch's driveway, but inside the house, the atmosphere was different. Grace woke to the smell of fresh coffee and cornbread baking in the wood-fired oven. Still dazed from everything that had happened, she walked slowly to the kitchen, where she found Caleb silently stirring the dough with steady, calm hands. He looked at her, smiled softly, and simply said, "Good morning." It was simple. It was real, and it was too rare to ignore Dot in the following days. She insisted on helping. She wanted to show her gratitude the only way she knew how, by working. She fed the chickens before sunrise, learned to feed the cows corn, carried buckets, and scrubbed the porch. In the kitchen, she relearned how to prepare simple dishes, helping Caleb with recipes he had inherited from his late wife. Everything was done in silence or with short, respectful conversations that gradually grew. The distrust that separated them had been dissolved that morning. The miracle had served as a bridge between two wounded worlds. Grace noticed the details. How Caleb would listen to the weather forecast on the battery-powered radio at 6:15 sharp. How he would pause for a full minute before leaving the house just to say a silent prayer. How his gaze lingered on the makeshift crib where Noah slept, now fever-free. In return, Caleb respectfully observed her effort to hide her pain. He never intruded, but he never walked away either. It was as if he knew exactly what she needed. Presence, not explanations. It was a quiet evening after dinner, while she washed the dishes and he chopped wood in the yard, that Grace broke the silence. In a low voice, almost as if afraid of waking. A ghost, she told him. She told him about her sick father, about the lonely funeral, about her stone-cold stepmother, and the words that still echoed like a whip. You're just another burden. Caleb rested the hatchet on the stump and approached with slow steps. He sat on the porch steps, took off his hat, and stared up at the sky. You're not a burden, Grace. You never were, he said. You know, I almost lost my faith when Abigail left. She was my ground, my guiding light. I was angry at God for months. I thought he'd left me alone on that ranch just to see if I'd break. But then you showed up with your son in your arms. And in that moment, I knew he hadn't forgotten me. He was just preparing something I couldn't yet see. The words fell between them like silent seeds. Words that weren't promises, but testimonies. Grace didn't answer right away. Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to believe. She really wanted to, but she was still afraid. And it wasn't afraid of Caleb. It was afraid of having found something too good to last. She sat beside him on the stairs, beneath the stars that now shone brightly in the Texas sky. Noah slept inside, and the only soundtrack was the chirping of crickets and the crackling of the burning logs. I don't know how to trust again, she whispered. Every time I did, I lost everything. Caleb nodded slowly. Me too. But sometimes trust doesn't come whole. It comes in pieces. One step at a time, and you've already taken the first one. He didn't touch her. He didn't force a word. But she felt it. His presence was like a firm fence around her heart, not to imprison, but to keep out the wind. That night, Grace didn't cry. For the first time, she sat quietly beside a man and felt no fear. She didn't feel compelled to run away. Caleb offered her a mug of tea with honey and lemon, and she accepted without hesitation. They clinked glasses without words, only with a look that said, I'm trying too. And so, between one cup and the next, a story began to unfold. Not with promises, but with gestures, with patience. With God between them, stitching together every piece the world tried to tear. And deep down, even if they didn't yet know it, they had both already begun writing the next chapter together. The morning sun bathed the fields in a golden glow, and the smell of freshly cut hay filled the air with a tranquility hard to find anywhere else. Noah was already running around the yard, laughing, his bare feet sinking into the dew-dampened grass. Grace watched him from the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel, her apron tied around her waist, and her hair pulled back in a makeshift bun. For a moment, she forgot the past. This small plot of land with its white picket fence, pecking, chickens, and clear skies seemed more like a dream than reality. Caleb appeared beside her, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and handed one to her with that restrained smile she was beginning to recognize as the purest form of affection. They sat in silence, watching Noah stumble and fall onto the grass, only to get up laughing as if the world were free of pain. He's stronger, Caleb commented, happier. Grace smiled but didn't respond. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a rare kind of silence that united, not separated Dot. It was there, between sips, that he said it, simple, unceremoniously. "You and your son have a place here, if you want it. Not for one night, for as long as you want." Grace froze. Her heart beat faster. Her survival instinct, the one that screams, "Run before they take it from you," was instantly awakened. She placed the mug on the arm of her chair, looking away. "Caleb, I appreciate everything, but—" He didn't let her finish. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying the door is open. Whatever you want to do with it, it's yours." She was silent for a few seconds, then said softly, "I'll stay until Noah is strong, until he can run without falling, until he can eat without a fever. That's all." Caleb nodded, as if he understood more than words could say. "Then I'm happy to have you here until that day." It was an unspoken pact, an agreement between two survivors of life. No touching, no promises. Just a mutual permission to continue existing in the same space dot. As the days went by, the routine intensified. Grace also began helping with ranch paperwork, organizing bills, ordering feed over the phone, and answering mail. She was good with numbers, and Caleb couldn't hide his relief at having her there. Noah became the Cowboys' mascot, received miniature hats, rode on the back of ponies, and earned nicknames like Faithful Cowboy. But not everything was sweet, and it was on a trip to the local grocery store that the first stone was thrown. Donna Charlene, a town lady known more for her venomous tongue than her apple pie, watched Grace pay with the ranch's credit card. "Using the widower's money, huh? They say she settled in there like a tick. She's not even married, but she already lives there, runs errands, and keeps accounts." The sentence was said loud enough to carry the entire hallway. Grace stopped, took a deep breath, and held back tears. She didn't respond. She simply finished paying and left with Noah by the hand. But inside, the old fear returned, being seen as a burden, as a freeloader. She arrived at the ranch quietly, putting away the groceries, feeding the animals, feigning normalcy. But that night, Caleb noticed. He found her in the chicken coop, sitting on a crate, her eyes red. "I heard what they said," she confessed. "Maybe it's time to go." Caleb knelt in front of her, his eyes steady. "Grace, you and Noah are here by God's choice, not Charlene's. And if anyone wants to say anything, they should look me in the eye, because you're part of this house." The following Sunday, at the town church, Caleb stood up during the announcement, removed his hat, and said to the entire congregation, "I want to make it clear that this woman and this boy are blessings in my life. They helped me get this ranch off the ground. And if anyone still has anything to say, they can say it now. But let it be with truth, not venom." The silence that followed echoed louder than 1,000 words. Grace, in the back pew, felt her entire body tremble. Never had anyone defended her honor like that. As she left, Donna Charlene lowered her gaze. Other women approached with sweet words, praise for little Noah, and invitations for Grace to participate in the upcoming church bazaar. The town's outlook was changing, albeit slowly. But what had truly changed was within her, because for the first time, someone called her a blessing, and she did so before God and the people. That night, sitting beside Caleb on the porch, she lightly touched his hand and said, in the firmest voice she had ever used, "Thank you for seeing me." He squeezed her hand gently and replied, "I don't see you. I recognize you." And there, in silence, a seed was planted, not of obligation, but of true love, the kind that grows after pain and blooms where no one expects it. The Amarillo sky was clear that Saturday, as if to deceive hearts with the promise of peace. The town fair took over the main square with colorful stalls, the smell of roasting corn, children running around, and the background sound of a live country band. Grace, with Noah on her lap and a basket of artisanal bread in her arms, walked beside Caleb, smiling and waving. They were already seen in a different light as the silent widower finally smiling again. She, as the woman with a difficult past who had found new ground. But not everyone's eyes were smiling. Across the square, a man in a worn leather jacket and a somber gaze watched Grace's every move. He'd been there for days, prowling the town, gathering information, confirming the rumors. When he learned that Grace Miller was living on the ranch of a wealthy and pious widower, something stirred inside him, not longing, not regret. It was a desire for control. And that afternoon, he decided to act. His name was Hank Barrett. And he hadn't come in peace. When Grace saw him for the first time, her heart froze. The world around her lost its sound. Her laughter faded. Her footsteps stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, as if the ground had turned to glass. He smiled with that old cynicism. "Hi, sweetie. Did you miss me?" His voice was the same one he'd used to humiliate her years ago, before she'd run away. With Noah still in her womb, he took 2 steps forward. "I've come to get my son." Grace's face drained of blood. Caleb, seeing her expression, reacted immediately. Caleb stepped between them without hesitation. His eyes were hard as steel, his body tense like a lion protecting its cub. "You need to step away now," he said in a low but non-negotiable tone. Hank laughed mockingly. "And who are you? The new husband? Paying for what was once mine?" Before Caleb could respond, the sheriff's voice cut through the air. "That's enough." The lawman appeared, his hand already on his holster, his eyes trained to detect danger. "Do we have a problem here?" Grace held Noah so tightly that the boy began to cry. Caleb turned to the sheriff. "This man is threatening to take the child away from his mother, and he has no right to do so." Hank raised his arms theatrically. "He's my son, and I have a right to see him." The sheriff crossed his arms firmly. "Do you have a birth certificate? A DNA test? Any documents?" Hank's silence was his own condemnation. "Then go away now. And if you show up again, we'll talk at the police station." In handcuffs, the townspeople gathered around, whispering in indignation. The sight of Grace, the strong, silent woman threatened by that troubled-looking man, caused more outrage than pity. Some women from the church approached, offering immediate support. One of them, Sister Ruth, put her hand on Grace's shoulder and said, "You're not alone. We'll protect you." The next day, the pastor announced during the service that the church would provide legal and psychological support to any woman who is a victim of violence and persecution. On Monday, Caleb drove Grace to the city attorney's office. He paid the initial fees himself, without fanfare. "It's not a favor, it's justice," he said. Grace, still shaken, stood her ground. "I won't run anymore. I won't let anyone decide my fate anymore. If he tries again, he'll find a mother with faith and a voice." Caleb smiled. "And a rancher willing to turn heaven and hell to protect you." At night, sitting on the porch with Noah sleeping in her lap, Grace gazed up at the starry sky with eyes still moist. Why now? Why when everything was beginning to seem possible? Caleb sat beside her and replied, "Because it's when God begins to restore that the enemy despairs." The words resonated deeply. More than promises, they were assurances from someone who knew the valley and also knew the God of the valley. Following week, Hank disappeared. The constant presence of the police, the community, and prayers rendered his attempts at intimidation futile. No one saw him in town again. But what remained wasn't fear, it was bonding. Grace now looked at Caleb with something new in her eyes. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something that took root. What had begun as shelter ... was becoming love. And as she closed her eyes that night, with Noah breathing in her lap, and Caleb sleeping on the couch with the Bible open on his chest, she whispered, Thank you, Lord, for getting me through the storm, because it was in the storm that I found my promise. The weeks that followed were filled with peace and rebuilding. Hank Barrett's name faded from conversations, from the streets, and from Grace's mind like a distant echo from a time that no longer held power over her. Noah now ran around the yard, with the Reg puppies healthy and smiling, as if heaven had given him back his stolen childhood. And with each smile from her son, Grace felt the past lose a little more of its power. She was no longer the broken woman who arrived in the rain. She was different. She was someone who was beginning to blossom in the ranch's kitchen. Amid bills, notepads, and a calculator, Grace spent her afternoons updating the finances. She discovered she had more of a talent for numbers than she'd imagined. She corrected old mistakes, negotiated prices with suppliers over the phone, and organized expenses accurately. Caleb, always watching from afar, was impressed. "You've saved this ranch more than I'll ever admit," he said one night, handing her a sheaf of papers with the new sales contracts. "With you here, everything seems to work." Grace responded with a shy smile, her eyes fixed on her teacup. But the truth is, she knew it too. She felt like she was finally being useful, not as a hindrance, but as a contribution. In return, Caleb decided to reciprocate in a quiet but meaningful way. For weeks, he would disappear at odd hours, hammer in hand, walking to the east side of the property with boards and tools. She thought it was just another repair job, until she saw it. It was a small, pale wooden coop with a tin roof, a blue painted door, and a sign that read, "Faith Farm." Beside it, 3 hens pecked at the freshly mowed ground. "For you," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "You said you liked chickens since you were little. I thought it would be good to start raising them here." Grace brought her hands to her mouth in surprise. She laughed, really laughed. Her first laugh since her father died. And Caleb laughed, too, as if seeing that smile were the greatest reward in the world. After that, something began to change between them. Nothing explicit. There were no lingering hugs, no passionate words. But there were looks that lingered, silences that said more than entire sentences, and small gestures that spoke of a care born from within. On a full moon night, sitting on the old porch bench, Caleb told childhood stories of fishing with his father on the riverbank, and Grace spoke of the letters she could never send to her mother. Their grief was a bridge, not a barrier. That night, he reached out, slowly, without intruding, as if asking God's permission before touching the sacred. Grace, her heart racing and her hands sweaty, allowed it. Their fingers met in the middle of the pew, and they stayed there, intertwined, as if made for each other. Neither of them said anything. The moon was the only witness, and silence was the sweetest of declarations. Grace looked at him and whispered, "Why are you doing all this for me?" Caleb answered without hesitation, "Because you remind me that God still writes new stories, even for the pages we thought were lost." She felt her eyes well up, but she didn't cry. She just squeezed his hand tighter. It was the beginning of something they both recognized, but couldn't yet name. Something divine, planted with prayer and watered with time. That night, as Noah slept peacefully, Grace looked up at the sky and whispered a prayer she hadn't said in years. "Thank you, Lord, for teaching me that even the most broken hearts can still blossom." And deep inside, she knew love was already there. The season changed. The heat of summer gave way to the gentle breeze of autumn, and the yellowing leaves covered the ground like a carpet of goodbyes and new beginnings. Noah now walked around the ranch with firm steps, following the dogs and trying to repeat new words with that charming way of a child discovering the world. Between one fall and another, he learned to get up, and Grace saw in this a reflection of her own history. They were on solid ground, and the peace so longed for now lived within the simple walls of that wooden house. On a quiet Sunday afternoon after church, Caleb invited Grace to pray with him in the barn. It was a custom he'd maintained since he was young, a place where he felt closest to God. The freshly stacked hay, the smell of the earth, the sounds of the horses breathing in the distance. Everything there felt sacred. They sat side by side on 2 crates. He held her hand and in a calm voice began to speak to God. Lord, I don't know how to write poems or give expensive gifts, but if it be your will, teach this heart to care for another with truth and patience. Grace, her eyes closed, squeezed his hand and felt her soul tremble. When the prayer ended, Caleb turned to her, his eyes teary but firm. Grace, I don't want to be just the man who helped you when you first arrived. I want to be the man who walks beside you ... every day. God willing, I want to be the one who holds your hand all the way. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Grace placed her hand on her chest, took a deep breath, and whispered, You already are. They embraced right there. A full embrace. Unhurried, unafraid. Noah stumbled into the barn, as if guided by the scene. He looked at them both, Ava toothless, smiled, and stretched out his little arms. Daddy. The word came out pure, spontaneous, like a ray of sunlight piercing time. Caleb knelt and picked him up, his eyes shining. That's what I want to be for you too. Every day. What God has joined, no one separates. And in that moment, they knew. A new family had been born there. The news spread warmly throughout town. Double Hope Ranch, as Caleb decided to rename the property, would be the venue for the wedding. There would be no luxury. There would be no excess, but there would be purpose. The community rallied. Donna Ruth arranged flowers from her own yard. The cowboys hung burlap banners. The women of the church set up a table of homemade sweets. And the local pastor, a man of serene faith, prepared the blessing as if recognizing a miracle in the form of a couple. On the wedding day, the sky dawned clear, with delicate clouds like veils hovering over the field. Grace wore a simple white dress with long sleeves and lace at the cuffs sewn by the baker's wife, who insisted on making it free. Noah, dressed like a mini cowboy, entered before his mother, carrying 2 rings tied to a piece of wood carved by Caleb. He handed them over with trembling hands and said, For Mommy and Daddy. No one could hold back their tears. Caleb, dressed in formal attire with worn boots and a straw hat, held Grace's hand tightly and tenderly. The pastor raised his voice before everyone. This marriage wasn't born of an invitation. It was born of a rescue. It wasn't set with a date, but with faith. And if there's any union that God himself blessed with his own fingers, it's this one. The words echoed like heavenly trumpets over the ceremony. When Caleb and Grace said, I do, the world seemed to slow down just to witness the moment. The kiss was soft, delicate, but full of promise. It was the kind of kiss that seals scars, that transforms 2 survivors into future builders. When they pulled away, Noah clapped his hands and shouted, Yay! Drawing laughter and tears from the audience. It was confirmation that the miracle was complete. The rejected woman, the widowed rancher, and the boy who nearly died on a stormy night were now family. That night, as they sat on the porch, their hands clasped together, Noah asleep in her arms, Grace looked at Caleb and said, If I had given up on that road, I would have lost all of this. He whispered back, his eyes too. The sky, but you didn't, and neither did God. And there, with the moon as their witness, their story finally came to a close knot with a full stop, but with the beginning of a new chapter, written by the hands of heaven itself. Time passed like the wind that runs freely through the fields of Amarillo, carrying leaves, memories, and the seasons of life. The ranch, once silent and isolated, was now home to voices, projects, and laughter. The fences were widened, the barns renovated, and the name over the entrance, Double Hope Ranch, had become more than a brand. It was a refuge, a symbol, a place where pain found space to be healed, where those who arrived in the rain learned to flourish under the sun of mercy. Grace walked through the yard, hand in hand with other women. Most of them had arrived here wounded, as she had once been, with their hearts broken and their eyes downcast with shame and fear. Now they received shelter, legal support, hot food, and above all, prayer. She was the one who led the weekly healing and faith gatherings, the one who listened in silence, the one who taught them how to cook, how to pray, how to dream. "If God lifted me from the ground with a baby in my arms," she said firmly, "then he can do the same with any of you." Noah, now a grown man, had left the fields to study theology in Dallas. He returns on weekends. He wears jeans, dirty boots, and a Bible tucked under his arm. When he steps into the pulpit of the local church, he speaks with the authority of someone who has experienced a miracle. "I should have died that night, but my life was saved by a prayer and by a rancher who heard the voice of God." Everyone knows him as the Miracle Boy, and he carries this title as a mission, not a trophy. Caleb, now with gray hair, still wakes early, makes coffee, and listens to the old radio on the porch. But his smile is lighter, his eyes more serene. Every morning, before feeding the horses, he stops in front of the barn and says, "Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for her." Grace always watches from a distance, her heart still grateful. Even after so many years, the love between them hasn't become a habit. It's become a covenant. And every look they exchange still says, "I would choose you again." One day, Grace was driving along the road where it all began. As she rounded the bend that almost became her end, she stopped the car. She got out slowly. She walked to the exact spot where, decades ago, she had stood, covered in mud and fear, with a feverish Noah in her arms. The wind blew just as strong. The fence was still there, rusted and sturdy. Closing her eyes, she went back in time. The rain, the engine, the man kneeling in prayer, unaware of her. And then she whispered, "That day when all seemed lost, God wrote a new beginning." Asterisk, if this story touched your heart in any way, if you've also gone through moments when everything seemed lost, but something or someone showed you that God was still there, then leave your comment below. Tell us, what was your miracle? When was the moment you felt you weren't alone? This channel exists for this, to share stories that heal, that move, that inspire. Stories that prove that it's still worth believing in love, faith, and rebuilding. So subscribe now, activate the bell, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the end can be just the beginning. And now I want to know, would you have trusted Caleb on that road? Have you ever experienced something similar to Grace? What would you do if someone called your child burden? And do you believe in miracles? Write your comments below. I read them all one by one. And who knows, maybe the next story we tell here will be similar to yours? Thank you for watching until the end. May God bless you, and never forget, miracles still happen, especially when everything seems over. See you in the next video. Until then,